Welcome to the bottom of the rabbit hole. Salute to all the Matrix University subscribers tuned in. You are always appreciated. In this video, we're going to finally break down and explain Neo's powers in the real world. As usual, heavy spoilers will be required. And if this is your first time down here, or you want to know everything about the Matrix universe, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you do not miss out on any yellow-pilled content. Neo's powers outside the Matrix could be the single most debated aspect of the Matrix trilogy. I've watched The Matrix, Reloaded, Revolutions, The Animatrix, played all the video games, and read all the comics. Even with all the Matrix media as a foundation, my own thoughts about this subject has certainly evolved over the years. Oftentimes, I see this topic reduced to a science versus supernatural debate. At the end of the day, it's science fiction, and it doesn't have to make sense, but anyone who watches this entire video should at the very least leave with a better understanding of why Neo has powers in the real world. Let's start with identifying Neo's powers outside the Matrix. Neo destroys attacking machines with a hand gesture. Neo can see the Smith virus and the machines after his eyes get charred. Neo comes back to life. Before we move forward, it is important to recognize that in the real world, Neo cannot dodge bullets. Neo cannot fly. Neo cannot move objects using telekinesis. Neo cannot see Trinity without eyes. Neo cannot resurrect Trinity. Yet he can do these things inside the Matrix. We first see Neo destroy Sentinels in the real world during the final moments of The Matrix Reloaded, leaving the audience with this event as a cliffhanger setting up the third film. The Matrix Revolutions is the most ambiguous of the trilogy because it asks the audience to participate by not providing a definitive answer of how Neo was able to do things outside of the Matrix. Make no mistake, this is absolutely by the Wachowskis' design. While writing the trilogy, the Wachowskis had the following Arthur Schopenhauer quote up on their wall: "The fundament upon which all our knowledge and learning rests is the inexplicable." They felt if they outright define certain things as the creators, their interpretation then becomes law or dogma. In the Best of the Wachowski interview compilation video, Lana tells us that Reloaded deconstructs the concepts introduced in the original Matrix film, and Revolutions helps the viewer construct a new understanding in the wake of all that deconstruction. In this way, the arc of the trilogy is designed for you as the viewer to make choices in the end. I know someone out there is thinking, well, if that's the case, then why are you against choosing the Matrix inside a Matrix theory? My answer is that the idea simply isn't supported by the films, requires flawed logic, and creates new problems. For example, if the city of Zion was still inside the Matrix, the machines would not have to send an army, they could simply deja vu keystroke the whole thing away. If the machine city was still inside the Matrix, the Smith virus would not have been a real threat to the system either. Nothing would have been at stake, and there would have been no reason to negotiate with Neo. In a hero story, the protagonist typically changes or grows in some way by the end. In a tragedy, the hero may or may not change by the end. The Matrix trilogy is clearly a hero story and not a tragedy. If there was truly no escape to the simulation, then Neo would have sacrificed himself for nothing, making the film a tragedy. It would only make sense to let the audience in on this. Instead, the production designer, the cinematographer, and the Wachowskis themselves have all discussed in interviews the green versus blue visual color schemes the films use let the audience know the difference between the Matrix and the real world. Nowhere has any actor or anyone who ever worked on the film ever talked about the no escape concept. That idea fails the test of empirical falsification. Lana Wachowski has also said in an interview that the metaphorical Matrix of the real world is the prophecy of the one being used as a dogmatic system of control. And again, makes zero reference to multiple layers of simulation. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on that because there is a lot to cover here, and I've already made a detailed Matrix is Not Inception video here on this channel. In that video, I mentioned 3 topics that require their own dedicated video discussions, which are basically the frequently asked questions or go-to rebuttals. Neo's powers outside the Matrix, the battery problem, and Mobil Avenue. I'm really glad I made those last 2 videos first, because they both address foundational concepts that are very relevant here. From the Solving the Battery Problem video, it is important to understand that the machines are using human brain activity, thoughts, and emotion to generate power. The major takeaway from the Mobil Avenue video is that Neo's access to Mobil Ave was wireless, and that the construct is a hub exclusively for exiled programs. With regard to Neo's ability to destroy Sentinels in the real world, that last part is kind of a big deal, because the Oracle tells Neo exiles are programs who have declined to return to the source. Smith also tells Neo that he knew he was supposed to return to the source, but chose not to, instead becoming an exiled program. When Neo chose to save Trinity, instead of resetting the Matrix, He too declined to return to the source. In the Smith is Not the One video, I discussed that the architect tells us Neo is hybrid, and the Smith virus taking over Bane inside the Matrix shows us that the concept of a programmed mind in a human body is supported by the films. Accepting this non-linear concept might be the single most important piece to understanding Neo's powers outside the Matrix. When I see people fall into the science versus supernatural debate trap, it is usually because they've already decided that Neo is either all program or all human. Let's take a closer look at the architect's conversation with Neo.
You have many questions, and though the process has altered your consciousness, you remain irrevocably human.
So the architect states that Neo is human, and in the very same sentence addresses a specific distinction between mind and body by saying the process has altered his consciousness. He goes on to say,
Your life is the sum of a remainder of an unbalanced equation inherent to the programming of the Matrix.
In other words, Neo's life is the result of a program error, a program written by a machine. Therefore, Neo is more than human. Neo describes this as the problem of choice. I also like to think of it as the collective manifestation of free will. But for any of the hybrid skeptics out there, the architect continues to say,
Return to the source, allowing a temporary dissemination of the code you carry, reinserting the prime program.
The function of the one is now to return to the source, allowing a temporary dissemination of the code you carry, reinserting the prime program. Not only does the architect tell us that Neo is in fact carrying code, but that code is specifically the prime program of the Matrix, and that Neo's purpose is to return to the source, which is a protocol exclusive to programs. For good measure, the architect informs us that this is by design. Your 5 predecessors were, by design, based on a similar predication, a contingent affirmation that was meant to create a profound attachment to the rest of your species, facilitating the function of the one. We also know those designers are the architect and the oracle.
If I am the father of the Matrix, she would undoubtedly be its mother.
It is important to notice that he describes them as mother and father. In this paradigm, you have Neo as the son or body, the architect as the mind or divine masculine, the oracle as the spirit or divine feminine. In Christianity, the shield of the Trinity or shield of faith is a traditional visual symbol which expresses many aspects of the doctrine of the Trinity. It was first formulated as early Christians attempted to understand the relationship between Jesus and God. The Father existed prior to the Son, who was not by nature God, but rather a changeable creature who was granted the dignity of becoming Son of God, identifying the Holy Spirit as the wisdom of God and the one who grants the foreknowledge for prophecy. Once the architect labels himself as the Father, the rest just falls right into place. In this case, machine became man so that man can become machine. After Neo chooses the door on the left, he chooses exile, then both rescues and revives Trinity. Back on the Neb, none of the crew had seen a Sentinel prepare a tow bomb in action before, but Neo instinctively knows it's a bomb, which is the first indication that he became aware of his connection to the source in the real world. As the Sentinels get closer, Neo stops and says, "Something's different. I can feel them." Neo then raises his hand as if he's getting ready to use the Force to destroy them. So the real question is, what's different? Now here is where many choose to go the hard science route and say that because Neo met the architect, his clever hacker mind left with some kind of admin level access or password upon exiting the machine mainframe, then used his head jack as an antenna to hack the Sentinels in the real world. For what it's worth, I think that idea creates less contradictions than the multi-layered matrix theory. But in both cases, I feel like it's adding extra details that aren't really there or even required. If the head jack is supposed to be a functional antenna, it should have gotten fried when the EMP went off at the end of the first Matrix film. The architect also doesn't say anything about leveling up or passwords, but in fact told Neo he was carrying the prime program all along. And that is the real difference. Neo now knows he is carrying the prime program for the first time because the architect told him the truth. When Neo asks the Oracle why she didn't tell him about the architect, the prime program, or the previous ones, she points to the sign that translates from Latin to know thyself. There is an existing pattern for this kind of knowledge, unlocking new abilities within the Matrix universe. In the original Matrix film, once Neo believes that he is the one, he says, "I know you're out there, I can feel you now," just before flying for the first time. In the Kid Story Explained video, we talked about how the kid was able to utilize special abilities only after believing in Neo and being exposed to the knowledge that the Matrix wasn't true reality. We also traced each of the dialogue references made in the Matrix trilogy using the word miracle. as well as going into detail about the kids' character references that trace back to philosophers like Karl Popper and René Descartes, who supported the concept of interactionist dualism. Interactionism makes a specific distinction between mind and body, which I've already pointed out. The architect also makes this same distinction in his speech. Even Neo himself does this when asking the Oracle what happened. Neo says, quote, "Tell me how I separated my mind from my body without jacking in. Tell me how I stopped 4 sentinels by thinking it." Right there, Neo doesn't mention anything about hacking or reverse engineering his hardware. He simply says that he stopped 4 sentinels by thinking it. The Oracle responds to Neo's question by saying, "The power of the One extends beyond this world. It reaches from here all the way back to where it came from, the source. That's what you felt when you touched those sentinels. But you weren't ready for it. You should be dead, but apparently you weren't ready for that either." In other words, the One doesn't just have powers inside the Matrix, but also has a connection to the source outside the Matrix. Neo was the first and only one to choose not to return to the source so that he could save Trinity, after being provided the knowledge that he carries the Prime program. Also notice that the Oracle says Neo touched the Sentinels. Since we don't see Neo physically touch the machines with his hands, and since he ends up in Mobile Avenue right after, I believe that this connection is in reference to an outer body experience. Even though the Oracle does not provide specific details, it is important to notice that she already knows this event took place in the real world because she too is connected to the source from inside the Matrix. Whereas, Neo's hybrid status allows him to be connected from both inside and outside the Matrix without a hardwire connection. While Neo's consciousness was trapped in Mobile Avenue, the Oracle sends Morpheus, Seraph, and Trinity to rescue him from the Trainman, who is loyal to the Merovingian. The Merovingian says, "Some might think this a strange coincidence, but I do not." He says that because the Merovingian is well aware of the One having the consciousness of a program. He goes on to ask, "I am curious though, as to how it actually happened. Do you know?" Which tells us that he too doesn't know the specific details of how Neo can exercise powers in the real world. The irony here is that in The Matrix Reloaded, the Merovingian goes on a rant about how choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without. That the why is the only real social power, and without it, you are powerless. Yet here he admits to being curious about the how. For years, I thought that Trinity's leveraging Neo's release by way of an improvised Mexican standoff was a bit of an easy out. It wasn't until I made the Mobile Avenue video that I started to see Neo's exit from a different perspective. Okay, you got yourself in here, you can get yourself out. While they're all in Hell Club trying to negotiate Neo's freedom, Neo is in limbo meditating. We don't know how much time has passed, but we do see him visualize the power lines, which is the Machine City's direct connection to their source of power. Remember that much of their power is generated by the thoughts of humans still connected to the Matrix. In this moment, Neo manifests his exit to Mobile Avenue, or as Morpheus would say, change whatever he wanted. The law of attraction teaches focus on feeling the end result and allowing the universe to work out the details. Neo focused on getting out, and in that moment, Trinity delivered a way out. When Neo felt the machines coming to attack in the real world, he manifested their destruction through his connection to the source by thinking it. Let's move on to Neo's ability to see in the real world without eyes, or as I like to call it, Neo's gold light vision. Don't forget that Neo can see Seraph's gold light inside the Matrix and identified that as meaning the Seraph program was from the Machine City. Neo does this before meeting with the architect. Lana Wachowski has gone on record saying that the gold light is key to the Matrix Trilogy. When I started this channel, I uploaded a detailed analysis on this subject in the Matrix Golden Key video. The golden aura signifies divine protection and enlightenment. A gold aura indicates that you are connected to a higher power or that you have a strong relationship with God. This color also signifies that you possess wisdom, intuition, spiritual enlightenment, and inner peace. The gold light is that power which cannot be fully explained. The source code, the God code. However, in order to understand what's happening in the scene where the Sentinel's gold light touches Neo in the logos, we have to look at the Path of Neo video game. Just before the final boss level, Lana Wachowski gives a very brief, very fast summary of what all is going on towards the end of the Matrix Revolutions.
You see, at this point in the story, Neo stands on the verge of Satori, ready to resolve the paradox of choice and choicelessness, of free will versus fate, but that can only be achieved through an act of surrender, which occurs after he has abandoned the perspectival nature of truth, accepting the totality of present consciousness, which ultimately allows an evolutionary transition, transcending the Cartesian Dilemma through the emergence of delimited spirit, which then provides the world with a choice of a third path, the path of Neo, the path of P.
At this point in the story, Neo stands on the verge of Satori, ready to resolve the paradox of choice and choicelessness, of free will versus fate, but that can only be achieved through an act of surrender, which only occurs after he has abandoned the perspective nature of truth, accepting the totality of present consciousness, which ultimately allows an evolutionary transition, transcending the Cartesian Dilemma, through the emergence of a demonless spirit, which then provides the world with a choice, the third path, the path being the path of Chi. There is a lot to unpack here. Satori is a Japanese Buddhist term for awakening, comprehension, or understanding. In the Zen Buddhist tradition, Satori refers to the experience of Kensho, which means seeing into one's true nature, and is commonly translated as enlightenment. Next, we have the Cartesian Dilemma, which is typically centered around one of two arguments. The first is the dream argument. The postulation that the act of dreaming provides preliminary evidence that the senses we trust to distinguish reality from illusion should not be fully trusted, and therefore, any state that is dependent on our senses should, at the very least, be carefully examined and tested to determine whether it is in fact reality. Of course, we know that the dream argument is a major premise in the original Matrix film, and that Morpheus reveals to Neo Thomas Anderson was indeed living in a dream world. The second argument is Descartes' malicious demon, also known as the evil genius argument. Similar to the dream argument, Descartes imagines an evil demon of utmost power and cunning has created a complete illusion of an external world. At the end of Reloaded, Neo finds out that the architect created the Matrix. The last thing that was introduced in the Path of Neo summary was the concept of Qi. In traditional Chinese culture, Qi is believed to be a vital force, forming part of any living entity. Qi translates as material energy, life force, or energy flow. So when Neo says to Trinity that it looks like the whole machine city was built of light, that is what he sees. The life force or material energy of the machines, who are powered by the Matrix, that Neo carries the prime code for, which is why he can see the source of their energy without eyes. Now let's put all the pieces together to understand what is happening when Neo touches the golden life force of the Sentinel. The evolutionary transition is Neo's hybrid ability to interact with the source in the real world without being hardwired connected to the Matrix. The Sentinel crashing headfirst into the Logos again shows the separation of body and spirit, but it is only after Neo touches the astral projection or soul of the machine does he realize that he's fighting a demonless spirit. When Neo says to Smith, "I can see you," after his eyes were charred, Smith appears as a flame. The tech-savvy say this is because Smith has been flagged as a virus by the system, where the supernatural crowd might say this represents hellfire. Either way, we know that Smith is evil and wants to destroy everything. However, the machines do not appear as fire or flames because their true nature is not one of destruction. Now circle back to the Cartesian Dilemma. In the first Matrix film, Neo is awakened to the fact that the Matrix is a dream world. In Reloaded, he meets the mathematical genius architect who created the false reality. But it isn't until Neo touched the soul of the machine in Revolutions that he understands the designer is not truly evil. In that moment, Neo figures out that the only way to achieve peace is to stop fighting the machine and work together. This is the yellow pill of truth that prepares Neo to resolve the paradox of choice and choicelessness. After that moment, Neo doesn't kill any more Sentinels and instructs Trinity to fly over the machines into the nanobots of the Darkstorm Cloud. When the Logos crashes into the machine city, Neo miraculously survives the crash, but Trinity is fatally injured. Neo cannot see her without eyes in the real world, and he also can't bring her back from death in the real world as he did inside the Matrix. But when Neo brought her back to life in Reloaded, Neo says, "I know you can hear me," making reference to when Trinity told Neo that she loved him for the first time, after he died in the original Matrix film. It is because Trinity told Neo she believed he was the one that Neo was able to come back to life. So for the sake of parallels, Neo's ability to see the spirit energy of the machines in the real world, after having been to Limbo and returning from the dead, is much closer to Keanu Reeves' abilities in the movie Constantine than anything shown in the movie Inception. And what I like most about this comparison is that the main character, John Constantine, is neither demon or an angel, but rather someone who can see both in the real world because he was able to return from the spirit world. At the same time, this analogy isn't meant to say that Neo's powers outside the Matrix should only be considered supernatural. The issue that I have with the supernatural side of the debate is that people quickly default to saying Neo's powers were an act of God. In many cases, I've even read claims that these symbols and parallels only represent one specific religious faith or practice while ignoring the others. I honestly don't think that was what the Wachowskis intended. When asked about the cross of light displayed on Neo's chest during Revolutions, Lana Wachowski said that the transcendence of a material identity and the idea that Neo is delimited in that moment is more important to them than any religious iconic symbolism. On the other hand, when taking the pure science side of the debate, one has to add technical elements like antennas or extra matrix levels or nanobot radio waves that aren't shown to us in the movies or ever discussed by the creators in order to fully explain Neo's powers. The mistake I see made consistently from theories on both sides of the argument is a serious lack of Trinity. The architect tells Neo that his specific love for Trinity is what makes him unique compared to the 5 versions before him. It is Trinity's love that gives Neo the confidence to become the prophet that the Oracle believed he could be. The Oracle says, "You know what that means? It's Latin. Means know thyself. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Being the one is just like being in love. No one can tell you you're in love, you just know it through and through." Neo's development brings us towards consciousness and self-awareness, interrogating the reality or paradigm of a messiah. Previous messiahs in history like Jesus or Buddha loved everyone in this ecumenical way. However, as a writer-director, Lana Wachowski said she could not relate or access that, so instead they presented a new paradigm where a messiah loved the way we love. Trinity put herself in positions to sacrifice to save Neo, but more importantly, every time Neo flexes one of these powers in the real world, guess who is right there every single time? Trinity. Trinity coaches Neo back to life in the first Matrix. She's right there when Neo zaps the 4 Sentinels at the end of Reloaded. In Revolutions, Trinity grabs Neo's hand, grounding him back to the present moment when he touches the soul of the machine. Trinity even turns out the lights on the logos, just in time to prevent Smith from executing Neo with a lightning gun. And this can certainly be added to the list of just-in-time lightning gun miracles that we talked about in both the Cypher Explained and Kid Story videos here on this channel. In this case, we saw how Trinity turned off the lights, but hopefully by now, you understand that knowing the why is much more important than knowing the how. To answer this question, we have to look at behind-the-scenes footage from the original Matrix film. Keanu Reeves asks for some character information and direction while shooting the scene when the EMP is fired.
And my hand is on here, and I pull this out at the same time. I say now and then push. Pull.
Open, right? My eyes are...
Thanks, guys.
I know.
Bye.
Is it before the now or after? It's before. After the now. It's after the now? How does she know I'm back?
Cherry.
Faith.
So it's not because I opened my eyes?
Nope.
Why not?
I don't want to see your eyes open. Dark.
And how, if she pulls the plug, how does she know I'm back?
She knows.
Is there any cue from her phone? Is there? How does she know?
She knows.
First of all, I think it's great that Keanu Reeves is asking the kind of questions fans would ask about the situation. And the reason provided why Trinity knew when to pull the plug is the same reason as why she turned the lights off. Neo and Trinity are deeply connected. Why does Neo have powers outside the Matrix? Because Neo and Trinity are deeply connected, while Neo is directly connected to the source. The power of love conquers all. The overall lesson is that the Wachowskis invite you to construct your own experience by not forcing all the details. To quote Bruce Lee, it's like a finger pointing away at the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory. In the Switch Explained video, Lily Wachowski said the following: "We as human beings engage in art in a non-linear way, that we can always talk about something in new ways and in new light." End quote. So what do I believe? I believe Neo's powers in the real world were manifestations of divine technokinesis facilitated by the conditions created by the Oracle and the Architect, executed through the powerful love connection shared between Neo and Trinity, and made possible by everyone who believed in the path of the Wi-Fi Jesus. Anyway, that's my nonlinear theory, and I'm sticking to it. So the next time someone asks, how does Neo have powers outside the Matrix, you can share this video and let the yellow-pilled content do the work for you. Tell me what you believe in the comments down below. Links to all the reference videos are in the description box. And remember, as one realizes that one is a dream figure in another person's dream, that is self-awareness.